The rise of the Ottoman Empire is often marked by bold conquests and legendary sultans. But its true strength came not just from battles won, it came from how the empire expanded. Its influence across two of the most complex and contested regions of the medieval world, Anatolia and the Balkans. These regions were not just territories to be seized, but political mazes of rival beyliks, Christian kingdoms, tribal alliances, and shifting loyalties. The Ottomans didn't merely conquer, they integrated, negotiated, and projected influence. From the late 13th century through the early 15th, the empire's roots grew deep in Anatolia and then spread rapidly into southeastern Europe. What began as a small border principality would soon become the foundation of a world empire. The story begins with Osman I, the founder of the Ottoman dynasty. His early leadership in northwest Anatolia, around the region of Skut, placed the Ottomans in direct contact with the weakening Byzantine frontier. Osman's military raids against Byzantine fortresses were not only successful, they inspired a vision. He wasn't just a tribal chief. He began to act like a sovereign. As more Turkmen warriors flocked to his banner, his power grew. These warriors, known as Ghazis, were driven by the ideology of fighting the infidel, but also sought land, plunder, and political power. Osman provided all three, and by the time of his death in 1326, the Ottomans had established a firm presence in western Anatolia. His son, Orhan Gazi, transformed that presence into organized state power. Orhan captured the city of Bursa in 1326, making it the first true Ottoman capital. This was a turning point. Bursa was not just a military prize, it was a gateway into economic and political legitimacy. Orhan established one of the first Ottoman mints, formalized the military, and introduced administrative institutions. The conquest of Nicaea and Nicomedia further eroded Byzantine power in Anatolia. Yet what made Orhan's reign remarkable wasn't just his Anatolian policy, it was the way he extended Ottoman influence into the Balkans. In 1354, a devastating earthquake struck the Gallipoli Peninsula, damaging Byzantine fortresses. The Ottomans, under Orhan's son Suleiman Pasha, seized the opportunity and crossed into Europe for the first time, taking control of Gallipoli. This event marked a monumental shift from a regional Anatolian principality to a transcontinental power. The Balkans, fragmented by local Christian lords, the declining Serbian Empire, and a weakened Byzantium, became fertile ground for Ottoman expansion. Under Murad I, Ottoman expansion accelerated. Murad extended Ottoman control deeper into Thrace, establishing Edirne as the new capital in Europe. This was not just practical, it was symbolic. By placing his court in the Balkans, Murad was declaring the Ottomans as a European power. But expansion wasn't only through conquest. Murad used diplomacy, marriage alliances, and vassal arrangements to bind local rulers to the empire. Bulgarian and Serbian nobles were allowed to keep their lands in exchange for tribute and military support. This created a network of semi-autonomous but loyal vassals, extending Ottoman reach far beyond their immediate military control. The Battle of Maritsa in 1371 and the Battle of Kosovo in 1389 were defining moments. At Maritsa, a large Serbian-led force was ambushed and destroyed by the Ottomans. The psychological impact was immense. Balkan rulers began to see the Ottomans not just as raiders, but as a permanent presence. At Kosovo, Murad I himself was killed in battle, but the Ottoman victory ensured continued dominance. His son, Bayezid I, inherited both the momentum and the strategy. Bayezid, known as Yildirim or the Thunderbolt, expanded Ottoman control in both Anatolia and the Balkans with unmatched speed. In Anatolia, he subdued rival Turkish beyliks such as Jermian, Karasi, and Aydin, bringing them under direct control. This was crucial. Until then, Anatolia had been a patchwork of competing Muslim principalities. Bayezid's centralization campaign unified the Turkish-speaking heartland under one banner, the Ottoman Crescent. In the Balkans, Bayezid's campaigns were bold and far-reaching. He besieged Constantinople, pressed into Wallachia, and defeated Hungarian forces. His governance was efficient. In newly conquered territories, Ottoman timber systems were introduced, granting land to cavalrymen in return for military service. This created an embedded class of loyal warriors across the Balkans. Meanwhile, Islamic judges were appointed to towns and cities, introducing a new legal system that coexisted with local traditions. This was not just conquest, it was integration. Despite his military prowess, Bayezid's rapid expansion created enemies on all sides. The Byzantine emperor plotted with Western powers, Balkan coalitions grew restless, and rival Muslim rulers in Anatolia feared his dominance. Yet none of these threats were as devastating as the one that came from the East Timur. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Bayezid was defeated and captured by Timur. The empire entered a crisis known as the Ottoman Interregnum, where Bayezid's sons fought for power and the empire splintered. But the infrastructure of influence, roads, governors, tax systems, alliances had already taken root. Even during the interregnum, Ottoman presence in both Anatolia and the Balkans did not completely collapse. Local leaders, despite the confusion, continued to operate under Ottoman frameworks. It was Mehmed I, after defeating his brothers, who rebuilt the unity of the empire. And when he did, he continued the expansion and consolidation begun by his ancestors. What began with Osman's raids in Anatolia had now become a vast political organism stretching from Ankara to the Danube. Ottoman influence was no longer a frontier affair, it was administrative, cultural, religious, and legal. The foundation had been laid. The next generation would build an empire upon it. As the dust settled from the chaos of the Ottoman interregnum, a single figure rose from the ashes of dynastic conflict to once again reunite the empire, Mehmed I, the restorer. His reign was defined by not only consolidating internal authority, but by reaffirming Ottoman influence across Anatolia and the Balkans. Yet it was his son, Murad II, who carried that vision even further. By the time the 15th century matured, the Ottomans were no longer merely expanding their reach. They were tightening their grip on an empire that straddled continents, cultures, and centuries. Murad II resumed the strategy that had proven so successful. Military dominance fused with administrative integration. He launched calculated campaigns into Greece, Albania, and Serbia, defeating alliances formed by the remnants of Byzantine and Western powers. Notably, he recaptured Thessaloniki from the Venetians in 1430, reasserting control over a critical Aegean port. This was more than just a military gain, it was a declaration of maritime intent. Thessaloniki gave the Ottomans a major naval base, further tying their Anatolian and European territories together by sea as well as land. But conquest alone does not solidify control. Murad focused on establishing Islamic legal institutions, replacing fragmented Christian and feudal systems with qadis, vakifs, and madrasas. These weren't just tools of governance, they were tools of identity. In regions where cultures blended uneasily, such institutions gave people a new sense of order and embedded them in a larger imperial narrative. And yet, Murad did not force conversion on Christian populations. The empire functioned on pragmatic pluralism. As long as loyalty and taxes flowed, religion was tolerated under the millet system. This approach made Ottoman rule not only endurable but preferable for many local populations weary of constant warfare and instability. One of Murad's most defining moments came in 1444 at the Battle of Varna, where he crushed a combined force of Hungarians, Poles, and crusading knights. This victory shattered the last serious attempt by Christian Europe to repel Ottoman expansion in the Balkans during that era. After Varna, Ottoman dominance in southeastern Europe became a reality, one reinforced by law, loyalty, and legacy. Murad's death in 1451 passed the reins of power to his son, Mehmed II, a figure who would turn Ottoman influence into imperial transformation. Though only 19 years old, Mehmed was no ordinary youth. He was multilingual, classically educated, and deeply aware of both Islamic traditions and Roman legacies. From the moment he assumed the throne, his eyes were fixed on a single prize, Constantinople. In 1453, after one of the most famous sieges in history, Constantinople fell. With it collapsed the last vestige of the Byzantine Empire and the gateway between Europe and Fez. Asia now bore a new name, Istanbul. The conquest of Constantinople was a psychological earthquake in the medieval world. To Muslims, it fulfilled the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad. To Christians, it marked the fall of the Second Rome. For Mehmed, it was only the beginning. Immediately after taking the city, Mehmed embarked on a program of urban renewal and repopulation. Churches were converted, yes, but many were preserved or repurposed. Respectfully, he invited Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and Muslims to settle in the city, providing tax incentives and protection. In doing so, he transformed Istanbul into a cosmopolitan capital, a city of learning, trade, and imperial administration. The city symbolized Ottoman permanence and was carefully positioned as the beating heart of a transcontinental empire. In the Balkans, Mehmed's influence extended swiftly. He crushed resistance in Serbia, absorbed Bosnia by 1463, and launched repeated campaigns into Wallachia. His confrontations with Vlad the Impaler, though bloody, ended in Ottoman dominance over much of the region. But he also secured the empire's Balkan borders through marriage alliances, vassal treaties, and the strategic use of Devshirme recruits, Christian boys trained to serve as elite janissaries or imperial administrators. This policy didn't just bolster the army, it created a loyal bureaucratic class drawn from the very lands the Ottomans had conquered. In Anatolia, Mehmed II returned to his father's unfinished mission, crushing Turkish beyliks that remained semi-independent. The most significant among them was the Karamanids, a powerful rival dynasty based in central Anatolia. Through a combination of military pressure, sieges, and infrastructure development, Mehmed absorbed their territory, eliminating a key threat to central Ottoman authority. He also reformed the timberland system, ensuring that conquered territories were not just added to the empire, but absorbed into its economic bloodstream. To ensure imperial unity, Mehmed initiated massive infrastructure projects across both Anatolia and the Balkans. Roads were paved and repaired. Bridges like the Mehmed Paša Sokolović Bridge in Visegrad and fortresses like Rumeli, Hisari were erected not only as military posts but as symbols of imperial will. His postal routes and caravanserais ensured messages, goods, and soldiers could move swiftly from Edirne to Erzurum. The empire was no longer a series of territories, it was an interconnected machine of administration and control. Religion also became a tool of influence. Mehmed declared himself Kaiser-i-Ram, signaling to both Muslims and Christians that he was not merely a sultan but a world emperor. He built the Fatih Mosque complex in Istanbul, establishing a new spiritual and intellectual hub. Meanwhile, Sufi orders like the Mevlevis and Bektashes spread Ottoman influence deeper into rural and border regions, creating cultural bonds where swords alone could not reach. By the end of Mehmed II's reign, Ottoman influence in Anatolia and the Balkans had shifted from regional presence to imperial dominance. Borders were fortified, roads connected distant provinces, cities pulsed with mixed populations, and governance was layered with systems that balanced power, law, and religion. The Ottomans were no longer expanding their influence, they were embedding it. The foundation laid by Osman and Orhan, strengthened by Murad and Bayezid, restored by Mehmed I, and crystallized by Murad II, had finally become an empire under Mehmed the Conqueror, one that did not just hold land but shaped civilizations. Anatolia and the Balkans were no longer the peripheries of competing lords. They were the twin pillars of an empire that would shape the course of 3 continents for the next 5 centuries.